If you haven't already done so, I would just recommend at this point clicking File and Save, just saving your scene. Okay, so now what we want to do is add a few more textures to the ground, and then toward the end of this video we're going to add a few more trees. Okay, so where we get the trees meeting the mud, because these are kind of conifer trees, we would expect some kind of like conifer leaves dropped on the ground. So luckily in our project, assets, and PBR ground materials, in the materials itself and in the grass, we've actually got one, grass 07, that actually has these nice conifer kind of things that looks great underneath these trees. So let's create a new texture for that on our terrain. So in the inspector, we're going to go back to our paint terrain, choose the paint texture, and under our layers we can now create a new layer. And let's just call this conifer leaves, something like that. Click create, and it was grass 07. And let's click on layer properties and find the normal map. So that's grass 07. And I'll come back to all of that a little bit later. Now I can see that I've actually got a filter going on at the moment, the slope. So I'm actually just going to check that one off. Okay, so you just click on the eye in order to disable it. So I'm using brush number 4. I'm just going to set up my tools here. So I'm wanting sort of a strength of around 1 all the way up to 1, but I actually want a bit of jitter on this so that it can vary between the amount of strength. So 0.062. Okay, on this one. My brush size, it's a bit big at the moment, so I'm going to reduce this down, not that far. 0.2, no, that's way too tiny, isn't it? So 2, yep, 2 is pretty good. And with a bit of jitter, 0.028. Okay, so it's got a little bit of jitter, it'll move between brush sizes. My brush rotation, yep, up here, and quite a bit of jitter on this one. And my brush spacing, I'm just going to increase this to about 9. And this helps to sort of smooth out the transition between this and the underlying texture. Okay, so let's paint some of these details in. Wow, that brush size is going crazy, isn't it? Let me just see what that looks like. It's interesting, but I think that brush size was a little bit crazy there, the way it was going there. So let me do Control and Z in order to get rid of those. So for my brush size, my jitter is probably too much. So let me go 0.028. That's better. Okay, you just basically clicking and dragging in order to sort of rotate around, and now you've got some kind of fall off going on there. Great. So that when we take a quick look at this, it looks like we've got some kind of fall off from these. Let's do this for each of the trees. Okay. I notice they do disappear while you're painting. That's quite normal. You will notice that you have to kind of really click and drag quite a bit in order to get this to go on. That's as a result of the spacing. So the more spacing you have, the more it will do that. The less spacing you have, you can just paint directly on there, but it doesn't always give you a great effect. So on these few, Now, you don't have to be extremely precise with this, just enough to sort of give the essence or the feel that this is a real environment. So good ground texturing is the key to having like really good scenes. The better textures that you can acquire, the more realistic everything looks. So right there you can see some nice fall off there. And if you want, occasionally you can even come directly onto the path and just get little bits coming on the path as well if you like. Okay, so that's just a quick guide to that. Let's just check it out through the character's eyes. So I wonder which one I've just done. It's not that one. I think, yep, this is the one. Okay, so, yep, when we get close we can just see little bits on the ground. Great, that one probably needs more up there. And that one definitely needs some as well. Okay, so just little bits on there. In fact, I might even increase my brush a little bit on those. So I feel it's not necessarily come across as much as it could. Let me go back to my scene. So under the paint texture, let's just click on Conifer leaves, and I kind of want to set some of this metallic and smoothness now. So for this, I'm going to increase the metallic a little bit in order to make it a little bit darker, and my smoothness, I might make these sort of glisten a little bit. My normal scale, I'm going to try coming up to like 1.4, just so you get more detail sticking out of there. Okay, and so for the actual painting itself, I'm now going to reduce my brush spacing down to about 3. And now when I paint, you'll notice it goes on a lot easier. Yep, something like that. So getting quite a bit more going on. Yeah, there's one here that needs doing, isn't there? Yep, great. So just those basically. Now that's what I want you to do. So this is effectively your task for the next session, is to go through all the trees and just do that so that there's that particular texture underneath the trees. After all, you don't want to sit and watch me do that for absolutely ages. Okay, so in this video we want to paint a few more trees, particularly around the edges of the map. Now I'm just going to switch off my fog for now so that we can see what we're doing more effectively. Now the issue I have with the trees at the moment is they're pretty high resolution. Well, they're not massively high resolution. If I just change the shaded wireframe, we can actually see they're not hugely highly detailed, but you know, putting enough of them, and yeah, there's going to be a fair bit of resolution required, isn't there, if you've got hundreds and hundreds of trees. So what I'm wanting to do is basically drop the quality of the trees for the ones that are quite far away. So if we go into our project, standard assets and environment, we've got our speed trees, and the one that we're using at the moment is the Conifer. It's this Conifer desktop. So if I just click and drag this into the scene, you can see that this is exactly the same one that we're using here, and it's got a number of colliders already on it. Okay, so in the hierarchy, you can see for our Conifer desktop, that's basically all of these. Now for this version that I'm going to be working on, this lower version, I'm probably not wanting this many colliders, so I can get rid of that, so the computer won't be detecting that many collisions for these trees. And if I click on the Conifer desktop, we can see it as an LOD, which is a level of detail. So if I click on Inspector, this is how the level of detail works. Each of these different sections will have a different quality tree, so that depending on how far away you are from the tree, it'll actually reduce its quality again until it's finally cold and it's not even visible anymore. And we can see the actual tree changing in the bottom there, the actual quality of it. At the moment, the quality is dropping when we're too far away. That's beyond the edge of the map. Okay, so it's not really optimized for this scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to re-optimize for this scene. So if, for example, I click on this one, this is the billboard. This is what the Conifer looks like if it was just a simple image. This is the LOD 0, which is the highest quality. This is LOD 1, and this one is LOD 2. So LOD 2 is going to be a lowest quality before it becomes a billboard. We could probably have up to about LOD 1 without worrying too much about quality. So if I now check out my shaded wireframe, you can see there's a lot less geometry being required for this. Okay, so let's create ourselves a variation on our Conifer desktop. So if we just right click on the Conifer desktop, and we're going to choose unpack prefab completely. So what that does, it allows us then to change and modify this Conifer any way we want. We definitely want this collision object 0, but we actually don't want any of these other collision objects. So just hold shift and select them all, and we're going to delete them all. Okay, we're only interested in the actual branch, the root itself. I'm going to leave all the levels of detail in there, that's fine, because they're basically switched on and off depending on how far away you are from the tree. Now I'm going to go to my inspector, and I'm going to say when we're about this far away for it to become LOD 1. In fact, maybe about that far away. So, in fact, maybe maybe it could be about here actually, so let's get it pretty close, and this way we can optimize this. So do you notice how that kind of drops in quality there? We're never going to see LOD 2 because it's too far away, or LOD 3. Okay, so this would be a more effective Conifer. I feel we can probably put quite a few of these into the scene. So what we need to do is basically create this as a new prefab. So let's click and drag our project, just drag it down here. In our hierarchy, let's click and drag Conifer desktop, and it will create us a new prefab, which is this one. Are they named the same thing? Oh no, that's a speed tree M. This is something else. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to rename this Conifer desktop. Let's call it mod, as in modified. Okay, and now we can delete this one out of the scene. with our project, back up here again. And now in our terrain, we can click on our inspector and go over to our tree section, and we can now add a new tree. So we're wanting our Conifer, but we're wanting the Conifer mod. All right, this desktop one. We're going to add this one. Now I definitely want to vary the tree height on this one, so I actually want quite a variation of tree height. So the more variation you give, the more it kind of like can be really, really tall or really small, really thin or really wide. And my tree density, I'm going to come up to about 18. Let's say. Let's see what happens when I start to paint these trees in. So we're getting a wide variation of trees. But they're still quite spaced apart, aren't they? So perhaps this tree density needs to be a little bit more. Let me try 24. We've got quite a few trees there going on. Okay, so there's quite a few, but there's still a lot of gaps between those trees, isn't there? So what I want to do before I go too far is just check it through the game scene, and I want to check my frames per second, see what kind of an effect that many trees is having on the FPS. Okay, so I'm down to 98 frames per second there, so it's certainly having a bit of a dramatic impact on it. So when I'm taking a look at these trees, actually that's not too bad. So 250 odd to 300, etc. Yeah, actually that's not too bad. It's not really having a massive impact. We've got a lot more trees going on. I probably like a lot more trees actually. And I'm guessing, yeah, I mean even there where I'm looking at those kind of rocks, I'm still in 80 something frames per second, which is still pretty good. Let me see what it's like when I get into sort of the center of the map and look this way. Overall, yeah, okay, that's pretty good. Keeping a nice range of frames per second. Okay, so what I'm thinking then is I might really increase the density of these trees so I can really cover this area. So my density is going to come up to maybe 40. Let's try this. So add one more tree. 64. It's adding a few more trees, isn't it? There we go. Now I'm adding some trees. And obviously I will once again have to check what kind of an effect it's having on the old frames per second there. Let me do the same here. So now that actually does look like some kind of a forest, etc. So inside of the game then, okay, so over there, pretty good, 300. Look this way, 145, 150. 1.2 million at the moment. I look this way and I get 5 million, down to like 98 frames per second. I look that way and I get 12 million triangles, 88 frames per second, which is still pretty good. Overall, yeah, this is kind of what I was looking for, this level of density of trees. Yep, it's looking pretty good. And it's not having a massive impact on my frames per second. Well, it is there actually, it's gone down to like 63, but if we take a look at the triangles, that's 20 million, wow. And then down to 5 million, so 20 million, 16 million, it seems to be, you know, when I carved out the river or that stream, I'm probably creating a massive amount of details in the actual terrain itself. So I think it's mostly that's causing it, as opposed to the trees. It's when I created this, and it's not necessarily that detailed really, but chances are that's actually covered in data. Let's take a look. So as part of my scene, if I get close to this now, and I go over to shaded wireframe, yeah, just take a look. This is quite covered with a lot of detail. So if I take my water, reduce that, it's not a massive amount, I wouldn't say that's absolutely huge, but there's a fair bit here and there. A lot more than what we get on this section certainly, but yeah, that's what's causing the hike in the amount of polygons basically, is that kind of shape. I could go in and smooth that out if I needed. If I do have a huge problem with the frames per second later, it's a matter of coming back here and just smoothing some of this out in order to kind of relieve the amount of triangles and polygons that are being used in that area. Okay, so the trees then. So what I want you to do, pretty much as we've just done there, I want you to cover the rest of the outside of the terrain in that many trees all the way around. Just don't put any more trees at the moment in this midsection. We can put in a few smaller hero trees in here when we're ready, but just cover the outside of this terrain in that many trees. Okay, so you should now have your scene sort of covered with all of these trees on the outside, absolutely loads and loads of trees, and just double check it in your game scene, check your frames per second. I've noticed a little bit of an impact on mine, so I'm down to around 80 frames per second at some points, and then straight back up to about 250 at various other points. It really depends how many triangles it's having to sort of render. So it's coping with this many trees basically. It's effectively just this little scene in the corner that's causing a few minor issues. But it's pretty easy to fix when it comes down to it. So at the moment with our trees on the outside, we can see underneath them that the textures are still kind of like this mud texture. So your task for the next video is just to go under these trees and texture under the trees. Okay, just to make it look a little bit more realistic. So start for example, from this point right here. And the more trees you have, the darker it becomes. If that's an issue, you can obviously just switch off your lighting if you need to. We're going to go to our paint texture, and we're going to make sure that we have our conifer leaves selected. We should have the same values that we were using last time, and it's just a matter of painting these in. Okay, so as though the entire area is just covered with conifer leaves. Since it probably would be if there were this many conifer trees surrounding there. So when you're looking at that, it sort of makes it look a little bit more realistic. So now it's just a case of going along all of the map and just painting in those conifer leaves just underneath there. All right, that might take a little bit of time. Just make sure that it looks quite effective. Okay, so you should now have these conifer leaves on the floor underneath all of your trees. All right, so it's adding that extra level of detail. And in this video, I want to add a few extra elements, notably some ferns to begin with that we might notice in the forest environment. So near to where my character is, I'm going to come over here, just switch off my fog so I can see what I'm doing. And in my project, in props, we have a foliage free, and in the models, we have a fern model. So if we drag this in, well, first of all, we notice it's really, really huge. So let's just make this a bit smaller. And I want to see it through the character's eyes. So if I just go into the game, so this is what it looks like through my character's eyes. Now it's not bad. It's a little bit light, a little bit green. It could probably be a little bit darker green and everything. But overall, it's not bad. It's got some nice shadows and stuff. So I probably just want to change the texture material on it to begin with, and then we can start laying these around the map. Okay, so back into the scene then. So I do need to put my fog back on so I can see what it looks like in the actual game tab itself. Right, so let's go into the hierarchy and just click on the fern. And in the inspector, here is the material. Now it's using a nature tree soft occlusion leaves shader, which is a little bit different to our normal one. Let's try changing this to a standard shader. Let's see what happens. Standard, okay, so now it's basically a PBR texture. It should be on cutout, and it's got its albedo. I don't think there are any normals for this. We've got an emission color which we don't need. It's got specular highlights and reflections, so let's switch off reflections, we don't need that. Over the metallic, we could increase this in order to make it darker, and then smoothness. Could make it relatively shiny, but I'm going to come down on the smoothness. And the alpha cutoff, you can increase or decrease this in order to give it more content. I think that might be a bit darker. Let's check that in the scene view in the game. That looks far more effective. That looks a lot better now, I think. Yep. Even from far away. Okay, it looks more effective, like it actually belongs in the scene. Alright, good. So that's not a bad size. We could probably do with some that are a little bit smaller as well, so a variation of size. So back in the scene, we can now switch our fog off. If I can get to it. There we go. So in the hierarchy with our fern, we can duplicate this and maybe move one over here like this and just rotate it around a little bit, and maybe even make this one a little bit smaller. And then we can duplicate this one. Bring this up here. Once again, just rotate a little bit so it's a slight bit different, and once again make it smaller. Let's duplicate this one again. Bring it out this way. Rotate. Okay, so we've got a few variations of them there. And let's see what this looks like through the character's eyes. Yep, so we've got a few variations of the ferns there. Alright, I think they're going to be quite nice. So now we need to place these around the scene. We need quite a few of these. So in order to make this easier, so we don't have to place each one individually, we can place these set of ferns inside of an empty game object. So let's just create ourselves an empty game object. Now what I want to do with this game object is actually copy the values of this fern, so that empty game object is in the same spot as this fern. So in the inspector, I'm going to come over to my transform, click on it and copy the component, so it copies the position and rotation and scale, etc. And for this empty game object, going to go into the inspector and paste component values, and now everything matches. I'm going to call this one, let's call it Fern Pack, something like that. So now in the hierarchy I can click all of my ferns, so hold shift in order to multiple select, and click and drag over the fern pack. Great, so now we've got ourselves a fern pack. So let's try putting some over here, some next to the rock, etc. So just click on it, Control D to duplicate, so we've got another pack. Put some kind of over here. We can always readjust these later. We're just sort of roughly putting them into position at the moment. Put some over here. Don't worry if they're floating above the ground, we can sort that out later. Duplicate again. And we can make each one unique, it's not a problem. Put some over there. Let's put some over by these rocks over here. So duplicate. Yep, great. So let's also put some over here. Duplicate again. Put some over here, and this time I might actually have two sets of ferns next to each other, so you get more variety. In fact, no, I'm going to go crazy and I'm going to put 3 packs of ferns in the same area. Okay, so give it extra kind of level of density. We can probably put some over here as well. So let's just click on one of these, and that's for the original fern pack. Duplicate this one. Put this over here, for example. Okay, so we've got a variety of ferns kind of hanging around. Now, for example, if I start with this one, it's just a matter of then going through them and just checking that they're actually on the ground and in the correct position. So you can actually just rotate the entire pack and they'll all rotate. Just watch that they don't go through the ground. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Let's take a look at these ones. get a little bit closer. And by the way, if you double click on an object, that means that when you zoom in, you're actually zooming in on that object. Whereas if I clicked on the terrain and zoomed in, I'm zooming in on the entire terrain, and that's going to mean it's going to get really slow to zoom in. So it's good to sort of select the objects you want to focus on. So I'm just going to move this a little bit closer to the rocks themselves. See how far I can go down to about there, I think. And just to make sure that this one's a little bit different to the others, I might actually just scale a couple of these up. Just so there's like a nice bit of variation. Now I can see that some of them are above the ground, so I'm just going to rotate the entire pack. Now we're not going to see it from that angle anyway, we're going to be looking over the top of it. Just make sure it looks okay from this angle as well. Yep. And obviously this was our original one. We can see that there's a few issues with our original in terms of this one being slightly under the ground, so I'm just going to lift this up a little bit. I think this one was fine. Okay, so let's take a look through a character's eyes. Now I've not finished them yet, I just want to see the ones that I have done. Yep, okay, they're looking nice. So when you get close to the rocks there, you know, it just adds the extra level of detail. It makes it look nice. Yeah, alright, so it's starting to look good. Now always keep your eye on the frames per second, so at that point when I'm looking that way I'm getting around 80 frames per second, which is still okay. This is like 307, now I'm looking that way, 169, 83, yeah, I'm still doing okay. Did I do any others? I think I sorted another one out as well, didn't I? No, maybe it was just these three that I'd done for now, wasn't it? And I'm quite happy with the way that they look. The colour of the materials look pretty good. All right, so your task. What I'd like you to do is pretty much the same with the fern packs. Just move them around the scene to wherever you feel that you need to put some, and try and make them a little bit more varied. Just laying them out in your scene to make everything look really nice. It may be a little bit time consuming, but you will notice that they will really dramatically improve your scenes. Okay, so now your scene should have quite a few of these kind of conifers, ferns rather, amidst the conifer trees, just bringing it to life a little bit more. We are going to be putting a lot more foliage into this scene, but before we get onto that, I'd just like to put a few more textures down into this scene. And before I even get onto that part, I am noticing that in the hierarchy it's becoming quite cluttered with objects. So I'm just going to organize this a little better. So in the hierarchy, instead of using like folders, what we do is we create empty game objects. So if you click game object and create empty, these work very much like folders so that we can organize things. So if you just click on this, I'm going to put all my ferns inside of this. So ferns. And then in the hierarchy, I can just click my first fern pack and hold shift and click my last one and just drag it onto the ferns. And that way I can actually close that down and it makes it more organized. And if I also want to, I can obviously just click on ferns and in the inspector switch them all off or on, which is going to speed up my process of working so that I'm not constantly battling against all of these individual items we've got. I might do the same with all of the rocks and the mountains and things like that. So game object, create empty, in the inspector let's just call this one rocks. And then I can just click all of my rocks Oh, we've got some mountain rocks as well. All the way down to there, it looks like. And I can now just drag those onto rocks. And once again, likewise, I can also just switch all those off if I need to. Okay, great. So that's made that a lot better to work with. Okay, so on the terrain then, I'm just going to switch off my fog temporarily so that I can see this a little better. I'm wanting to put a few new textures. Now the first thing that I want is on the ground. I'm going to switch off my shadows so that I can see this. We've got little bits that are kind of sticking up. It'd be nice for those to be almost as though they're actually little bits of actual rock that's protruding through it. So I'm going to use one of the inbuilt textures that come with the standard assets called Cliff. So in the inspector, paintbrush and paint texture, I'm going to put on another texture. So at the moment I've only got 3 textures, which is fine. I'd say if you're getting close to sort of 12 to 14 textures, that's quite a lot. If you're getting close to like 30 textures, you're probably using too many on one terrain. But at the moment we've hardly got any textures going on. So I'm okay to continue to add more textures. So this one is, I'll not call it cliff, I'll call it rocky. Okay, since it's like rocky stuff. Click create, and what we're searching for is cliff. Okay, this is the cliff albedo specular. Just click on this, and under layer properties, we've also got a normal map as well. There it is, cliff normals. And I'll play around with the rest of it shortly. Now, I'm wanting only to affect the bits that are kind of sticking up. So for this one, I'm going to use a filter, and it's going to be the concavity filter. And once again, you can read up on this in the manual for the terrain tools. So the concavity as both recessed or exposed. I actually want the exposed bits. So what that's going to do, it's basically going to paint any areas that are kind of sticking up. You can see little bits there in orange sort of being highlighted. I'm not really getting enough coming out there. So the way that we do this is we use our remap curve to define what gets covered and what doesn't. I could, if I wanted, go with one of these presets, but I'm quite happy with this at the moment. So I'm going to right click and add a key, and then as I move the key, you can see in the background I'm now getting a lot more coming out. So the more you change this remap, the more elements you're going to get. So I'm thinking something like this, so I'm getting a fair bit of coverage there. And then I'm going to change my feature size so that it only affects large areas. So notice if the feature size is very small, it's now affecting really little details and getting loads of coverage. The bigger you go, the less you get. So now it's just one big kind of blob, if you like. And that's exactly what I want. My brush spacing on about 8, I'm going to increase this, maybe about 24. My brush strength on 1. Brush size is good, and my brush rotation with a bit of jitter as well. Okay, so let's start painting a little bit of this rocky onto here. So notice how a little bit just comes out. In fact, I'm going to decrease my brush strength to about 0.6. It's a little bit too strong. Just going to be getting tiny bits of rock kind of just showing through there. Now you don't want to go too crazy, you don't want it to be too obvious. We just want it's almost like it's a feeling that there's a little bit of rock under there, but it should be nicely blending with this underlying element. And you may need to go over it a few times in order for this to kind of come through. Certainly where you've got any kind of sharp lines or those kind of things, it would be nice if that's more of a kind of a rock texture. So we've got something that's relatively sharp there. So the concavity is really useful. I find that's probably one of the most useful filters that you can use with you when you're painting. I do use that one all the time. Did that one go on? Didn't really notice much going on there, but this, where you've got this really obvious kind of ridge here, is a definite. Alright, that one should be quite strong. And you don't want them all to be as strong as each other. You want some of them to be a little bit more subtle. That one definitely should be pretty strong. And you don't necessarily want to cover too much of the path. You don't want it to become too like what's the word, repetitive, I guess. You want it to have a very random feel to it. We've got a little bit here. This would be interesting. Yep, it's finding that. And so those sort of very sharp edges, now they feel as though there's a reason why they're so sharp. Because obviously it's little bits of rock that are kind of protruding from the path. And then obviously something like over here we've got a little bit of a ridge. And that one might be a little bit more subtle in certain areas. And then I'm just going to press F to zoom in a bit. So we've got loads of stuff going on here. So most of this, I would say, probably looks like it should be quite rocky up here. Maybe a few little bits here. Yeah, okay. So basically just go through the path, texturing that as you feel it should be. And I just want to see what this looks like in the game tab. So now you can see a little bit of rock on the ground, so it just makes it feel a little bit more natural. And it's just adding those details. That could probably do with a little bit of rock there. I've not quite finished yet. And certainly there where you've got this very kind of obvious line, that should certainly be rocky. Let me take a look. Yep, so that looks pretty good. Little bits of rock there. Yeah, okay. And then we had this bit here that was almost covered in rock. So yeah, now it feels more natural. And in terms of tiling and stuff like that, the rock is fine. Okay, it looks good. And basically by painting in those extra details, hopefully we're also getting rid of some of this obvious tiling on this kind of path. Some of that could be done with rock. Yeah. So it's just helping to sort of convey this idea that this might actually be photorealistic when you're combining multiple textures. Okay, so that's the rock for the path. You know, feel free to sort of continue to add that. What I'm also wanting is some more elements on this mud. Now what I want is sort of like this mossy, grassy type mud. And we already have some of this. So in the project, under assets and PBR ground materials, I think it might be under grass, this one actually. So it's grass number 10. So this one is kind of like a very kind of a mossy mud type texture. So it's just going to be grass 10. So make sure we click on the terrain. I'm going to add another texture. And I'll call it mossy. Oop, there we go. And create, and it was of course grass underscore 10. So this one you can kind of see the moss there. And the normal map, grass underscore 10. Grass normal. Great. Okay. And once again I'll kind of, well, in fact, I know what values I want for this. So metallic is going to be about 0.166. So we've got a little bit of that. And the smoothness for this about 0.256. Okay, and my tiling, I'm actually going to have this one at 3 by 3. All right. So what we can see here, because I'm using my filter, I'm getting only painting certain parts of this. What I might try and do is take a look at the recessed. This might be quite useful actually, using the recessed. The recessed is basically just going to help me to only paint certain patches and not paint everything. So what I'm going to do is bring in my size of my brush and just ensure that my brush spacing, I'm going to really come up on this, and my brush strength, I'm just going to come down a bit. Okay, so what I'm wanting to do with this, and maybe my brush strength actually, I might actually just include a little bit of jitter so that I get a variation of strength. So what I'm going to do with this is basically just paint little patches just in here, and it may very well be a case of just going over this multiple times to actually ensure that this comes in. Okay, that's not that obvious, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my strength, I think. Bring my brush spacing down a bit until I get something that I'm quite happy with. Brush spacing down even more. Brush strength up a little bit. My jitter lower down. That's better. Okay, so that we can now see this. So basically, it's just adding to the complexity of the material that's already there. So I might do this bit. And feel free to move between recessed and exposed, so that now I can also paint this top ridge as well, which I feel would have quite a bit of mossiness to it. Yeah, okay, that's good. probably be a bit of mossiness around where this rock is. So notice how the filter is sort of helping me to sort of paint randomly in certain spaces, as opposed to just painting a big block of material on there. Big blocks of material look unusual and they don't look particularly great. Just little scatterings of this moss is going to look far more realistic and photographic like. I'm just going to change over to exposed. Yeah, and it's quite nice how that's sort of blending into this little bit of rock there. You often see that. Now wherever you've got like these conifer bits, you probably don't want to paint over those. And feel free to, you know, actually come onto the path a little bit in order to sort of blend this nicely. Just going to go back to my recessed. Just have a little bit of moss going on here. Okay, great. So now we've got a little bit more of a complex ground material going on there. So I'm only going to do that one at the moment. I'm going to leave you to do the rest, because obviously you don't want to watch me doing that. You know, that could be quite boring. So if I now go back into my game, I want to try and find where I've painted. I think it was over here perhaps. So now we can see some of that kind of moss. It just makes it look a little bit better. And obviously the shadows and things are working nicely with that texture. Let's take a look. Yeah, we've got little bits there, and it's just sort of standing out, isn't it, to make this look slightly more photorealistic. Yep. Okay, so I think I'm quite happy with that. So this is your task then, to effectively go over the path and just make sure that there's some of those rocky textures just on there wherever they are. Some of these that are just strewn around where you get these really kind of sharp edges and these sharp ridges, and then going over this mud texture and just putting in little bits of moss. Okay, and using the concavity filter in order to do that. So you should now have quite a bit of moss on the ground and some kind of rocks on your path. So you can see that the materials that are building up are becoming a lot more complex now. We've already got our ferns, but we need a lot more material. So what we're going to do now is actually start to create our own foliage and our own plants. So that's where this comes into play. Inside of the props, we have our nature volume 1. We have various elements such as a variety of different types of leaves. We've got different types of bark textures and various types of branches that are suitable for like trees and small bushes. The only issue with this Nature Volume 1 is the textures are not necessarily lined up correctly for what we want to use them for. We want to use the tree creator with Unity, and the leaves and the branches and those kind of things all need to be lined up perfectly in order for this to work. So for the resources for this session, I've just kind of arranged a couple of them and lined them up correctly. So for example, in the leaf folder we have our leaves, but notice that they're horizontal. Okay, all of your images have to be vertical, and the bottom of the leaf needs to match exactly the bottom of the image. There can't be like a gap. If there's a gap, it's going to show in whatever you create. Also, these images are very, very narrow. Okay, so they're long and narrow. They need to be perfectly square. If you don't do that, what happens is your leaves will basically just warp. They'll be stretched out. Okay, same thing with the branches as well. So if we take a quick look at the Nature Volume 1, although you got a load of great branches, that one's not so bad, branch 2. This one's upside down, not quite lined up, and this one's diagonal, so that definitely wouldn't work. It would need lining up, rotating, and this little bit of a branch needs to be lined up exactly with the bottom of the image. Okay, easy enough to do. Just take it into like Photoshop or GIMP or whatever, and just line them up. Quite easy to do. Just remember to do the same with the normal as well. So you might need to do the two together so that they line up. Okay, so we're going to be using these in order to create ourselves a couple of like foliage elements. So inside of the props, let's right click, create, and a new folder. And we'll call this, let's call it plants. And we're just going to drag all of these in. And obviously that will import. Now you will notice that the images come in a little weird. That's because they have transparency. So click on this one, and you can hold Control or something to click on this one. So in the inspector, you can see that the alpha is transparency is unchecked. So let's click that and click Apply. And there we go. Now it's coming correctly. The same thing with the normals. So if we just click both of those, Control click, you do need to ensure that the texture type is set to normal map. Otherwise it won't work properly. Great. Okay, so we're almost ready. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my main player. There's my main player. So in the scene I might just basically create a tree, like a tree element here, so that we can work on this. So Unity already has a great tree creator. It's based on the speed tree asset. Now the speed tree package, you can buy that on the Unity asset store. It's a little bit expensive, but it creates some incredible trees. The version that comes with Unity that's free is a very cut down version, not quite as advanced, but you can do some pretty good stuff with it. So game object, 3D object, and tree. Okay, and that's going to create us the sort of root of the tree. It's basically this trunk of the tree. And we're going to click game object and align with view, so now it appears there. And I'm just going to go into the inspector and just zero out all of my rotations. Great. Now just bring this down so it's pretty much on the ground. Now through my game view I can actually see this tree element there. Okay, so you get your own tree editor inside of the inspector, so we'll go through some of these elements in a moment. But first of all, we do need a texture to be applied to this tree. So in our project, Nature Volume 1, we've got a whole bunch of like bark textures. Well, what I want to go with is, I quite like this bark 13. So I'm going to create a material for bark 13. So right click, create, and material. Just call it bark 13. After all, that's what it is. And so in the inspector, I can now assign these. So bark 13. Let's take a look. There it is on the albedo, and then the normal. Bark 13 normal. Great. No reflections, so that's our material setup. So if we now click on the optimized tree to get back here again, and we click on the actual branch element, this is the trunk, you'll notice you've got a couple of materials. One of them is for the actual branch, which is this. Another is called break material. Breaks are basically these elements on the trees where let's say a branch is actually broken off, and it's the little bit on the side that it's almost like the cross section of the tree, the inside. That's what that's talking about. We don't need one of those since we won't be using it. So for the branch material, we're going to search for bark 13. In fact, it's right there. If not, just type it. Now we double click this and it's telling us that the material is not a tree shader. Okay, and we get a little exclamation mark. That's fine. We'll use this shader, Nature Tree Creator Bark. Just click apply and it will automatically convert it. Alright, so now through your game view you can see that we've got ourselves a nice texture going on. Now obviously that is way too big, because what I'm going to be creating is sort of like a small little sort of bush, or possibly like some kind of like little plant, or maybe even a really, really young tree. So in the game viewport we can actually control this from in here. So as long as we've got our branch selected, we can adjust the length of this so we can make it much smaller, and we can also click this as well. All right, maybe something like this, and then the radius we can make it a lot thinner as well. So let's go with something like this. Let's say crinkliness, you can basically make it really crinkly or really straight, it's up to you. I'm going to have a little bit of a crinkle on there, and seek sun will force it to kind of find wherever the sun is in your scene. So if your sun's over to like the far right or the far left, etc., it will basically just follow that. But at the moment my sun is right overhead. And the flare radius is basically the bottom of the tree. So sometimes you'll see these like sticking out. So can you see there, I'm making the bottom of this quite big. The flare height, you can make that go all the way up if you want, and then the noise of that, you can control the amount of noise that goes on. So let's give it quite a bit of noise, and you can see it sort of warps it at the bottom. Yeah, quite fun. So I'll just keep it like that for now. Okay, so what we need are some branches with some leaves, and that's where our plants, this one is going to come into effect. So what I'm going to do is create a material for branch 5. Right click, create, and material. Branch 5, let's call it. Okay, and in the inspector we can actually just search for branch 5. Now you probably already have a branch 5, a branch 05 or something like that maybe. Actually, I don't see it. Oh, there it is. We just want the branch 5 without the 0. Okay. Normal map, branch 5 again. Let's put that on there, and no reflections. Okay. Great, so we've now got our material. So let's click back on the optimized tree again. And we now want to assign some leaves to this. So this is this icon. So once we click add a leaf group, we get this. We currently have 1 leaf. I might just increase this to about 4 to begin with, so you get basically 4 different leaves. Its distribution across the entire of this trunk is based on a random. You can also choose, for example, alternate, and it will alternate, and opposite, and they will basically be opposite to each other, or whirled. And if you change the world step, it will basically separate them out at different parts. So I'm not sure entirely which one I'm going to go with yet. I want to wait to see what the texture is going to look like, the material on here. So where it says material, let's click on this, and we want this branch 5, which you can currently see there. If you can't, just type branch 5. Branch 5, which is there. Double click, it's going to basically create itself a tree creator leaves fast. Let's click apply. There we go, so now we can see it. And in the scene view, we can see that we've got these. Now they're relatively small at the moment, so we probably want these to be a bit bigger. So that's where our size comes into play. So whenever you get these kind of things here, they're basically randomizing. It's randomizing between the minimum and the maximum. Okay, so let's just get these to maybe come out a little bit. Now your perpendicular align will basically make them align like that, or your horizontal align will make them line up like that. Okay, so you might want to mess around with those a little bit. The growth angle will make them go up, or if you want it to go down, you will basically just click on your curve and make sure instead of it being 1, it will be -1. Okay, and it will go the opposite way, and it'll actually dip down instead of going up. The growth scale will basically make them bigger. And obviously frequency will just add more to these. So what I might do is actually have about 8 of these. So I've got a fair few going on now. And we can see that we've got a very small sort of like tree type bush going on at the moment. Now it's pretty big. If I were to, for example, play through this, you can see that that is pretty, it's actually bigger than me. Okay, but it'd be quite nice. I mean, if that's what you want, if you want something that size, by all means, you know, you can go with that. But I don't want it to be that big. I want it to be a lot smaller. So, like any game object, we can obviously scale this. So if I scale it down to like 0.3, on the Y 0.3, and on the Z 0.3. So now when I play through it, I've now got a small, tiny little sort of sapling, sort of bush type thing. Okay, and it looks pretty good. All right, it looks kind of interesting. If, for example, you didn't like the sort of root itself, you know it's really, really sharp at the top. Well, what we could do there is we could actually add a branch just to the top of this. Okay, so once again we click back on here, but this time we assign a new leaf group. Okay, so we get a second one, and we just ensure that this one is, let's say, set to world, and it's right at the very top now. But by the way, you can use your curved in order to move these around. So, for example, I can move that up and down the actual branch itself just using that curve. Okay, but I do actually want this one to be on top. And once again, I'm going to use that same material, that branch 5, and I want obviously that to be quite big. And let's just mess around with these a little bit, and the growth angle, maybe make it stick up a little bit. So that now it's, although it's still relatively sharp, it looks like it's now got something growing out of the top of it. Okay. Obviously you get too close and it doesn't look so great, but from a distance it kind of looks quite fun. You know, you can just about see it there, can't you? And in fact, I might actually even make that a little bit smaller. It's still pretty big, I think. So I'm gonna make this around 0.2, 0.2, and 0.2. And perhaps on the actual top of this, whereby I've got this leaf, I've got 1 at the moment. What about if I were to increase that to 2? Okay, just so I've got a little bit more going on. and just make sure that my world step is all the way up to the top there. And I can even twirl those around if I wanted. So now I've got a couple of like these right on the top there. And my growth angle, I can move those up, move them down, it's entirely, maybe even the growth scale, just make them a little bit bigger. Yeah, okay, so I think that size is much better actually. So I'm quite happy with that. So that's how you can make your own sort of plants and little shrubbery and sort of trees and things like that. We could even, if you wanted, at the moment there's not that many actual plants, leaves. You could obviously increase the frequency, or we could change the geometry mode from plane to something like cross, and it's going to like add a lot more. The only issue with cross is I feel that it gets a little bit messy, gets a bit noisy when you use this. And you can even use a tri-cross and you get even more. But if you check this out now, I feel it's usually a bit too messy. I mean, it's not bad if you like that. You could potentially use something like that, but I feel that sometimes it just gets a little bit too messy. So I'm just going to go with my kind of standard plane. Okay, so you just click on one of these and just change it back to just standard plane. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this is just ensure that the name is not optimized tree. I'm going to call it, let's say, small bush or something like that, since that's technically what it is. And then in my hierarchy, I can then duplicate this multiple times and move it around into different parts of the map. And actually what I can do here is actually just change the scale so that it's not all the same. So at the moment they're all 0.2 each. So if I do something like 0.4 on the X and 0.4 on the Z, so it'll actually just stretch it out a little bit. Let's see what that looks like. So notice how that's a little bit bigger now. And I think it covers a little bit more ground. It sort of looks interesting, I think. But obviously it's entirely up to you what you choose to create and how you want to do that. But overall, yeah, I think I quite like that one. So I'm going to leave it like that. Now what I can do, I'm just going to go back into my scene view. If you're going to move any of these, make sure instead of trying to move it like this, because all you'll get basically are these little points that you can manipulate. You have to click on the main tree itself in order to move it and manipulate it. I think what I'm going to do is basically create 2 or 3 of these in the same sort of area, so that when we move these to different parts of the map, we actually get some good coverage instead of just having these on their own. So in the hierarchy, where I've got small bush, and by the way, if you've not renamed this, I've just renamed it to small bush. I'm going to duplicate and potentially just move this a little bit and probably kind of rotate it around so it's looking a bit different. And then with this one, duplicate this one and just move this maybe up here like this, and once again just kind of rotate so that now we can see we've got a little bit of a build up of a few of those. So let's just see what that looks like through the player's eyes. Yep, so when you get to this, you can see you've got a bit of coverage of this. Okay, so there's a bit of that going on, and it kind of looks interesting. Okay, so it's pretty easy to sort of create your own flowers and plants and trees and things like that. Now in the scene itself, if I get a lot closer, and let's just say we're just on small bush itself, if I click on the leaves, it doesn't matter which leaves, I'm going to come down to the materials, and where we have our leaf material, we also have alpha cutoff. So if I go too far, it basically goes like this. If I come in, it will basically cut off all of the alphas, so it will make them much smaller. So you can kind of vary those to make them a little bit thicker if you want. View dependency is how well are you going to be able to see all of these leaves depending on your angle. And the shadow strength is how much does the shadow affect the underlying leaves. Now I want that to be quite extreme, all the way up to 1, so that it actually looks like it's part of this scene. The translucency colour, you can change that if you want. I'm quite happy with it. And the main colour, if you wanted to, if they were too bright or something like this, you could bring this down to the grey in order to sort of darken this. It's entirely up to you. I'm quite happy with the colour at the moment. And if I come back to my main tree, so this is the entire object, and it's affecting the entire object. We have once again the alpha cutoff and the shadow strength, so you can also control it from there as well. That's exactly the same as what we did with our material. Okay. I probably wouldn't mess with the tree seed at the moment, because if you do that, it's basically going to randomize the way that the tree is created. So it's going to change all your settings and stuff, and you're going to end up with different trees. And the area spread, we don't have to worry about this yet. A little bit later, once we start doing a little bit more with the tree creator, I'll explain all of these things. The area spread is only necessary if you're going to have more than one. One of these is basically your tree trunk. If you've got multiple tree trunks, that's the only time that you have to worry about that. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is click Game Object, create empty, and just call this I'll just call it bushes. And in that way I can take my small bush 1 and 2, put it inside bushes, and the small bush itself inside bushes. And then what I can do there, if I want to move these now, is just Control D to duplicate, and now I've got a whole new set, and I can just move these to wherever I want them to be. So let's say I want a few near these rocks here. So then it's just a case of bringing these into place, and you definitely want to get close to these. I might need to switch off my shadows so that I can see what I'm doing. You definitely want to check that they're not floating above the ground or anything like that. Yeah, okay, I think that's pretty good. And obviously these particular trees, my original ones, I might just want to move those back a bit, maybe up here like this. Once again, just double check that they're not floating above the ground, which they're not. I can see that base is actually going through the ground. Ooh, except for that one. Okay, so which one is that? That's that one. Move that one down. Great, so you can sort of manipulate them all individually. And bear in mind, if you want a variation, you can actually you can either rotate the entire thing, and that will rotate it all as a group, or you can rotate them all individually and they will all rotate independent of each other. Okay, so the task for you then for the next video is to line your scene with loads and loads of these bushes, just to create a little bit more interest and a little bit more detail. Just get these bushes all around your scene in the same way that you did with the ferns.